Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being brave enough to come to this 8:30 a.m. session. We really appreciate it. So we're talking about SLAPPs. I'm Matthew Caruana Galizia. I'm the director of the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation in Malta. I've been working on the campaign for SLAPPs for the past, it's going to be 7 years this year. And starting from my right all the way to this side is Paul Radu, who's one of the co-founders of OCCRP. OCCRP does a huge amount of investigative journalism every single year, and obviously in accordance with that, receives a large amount of SLAPP threats. And then next to Paul, we have Eleanor Rose, who's the enablers editor at the Bureau for Investigative Journalists in the UK, for investigative journalism, sorry, in the UK. Angela Matley, joint managing director at Public Eye in Switzerland. Susan Coftry, co-chair of the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition and director of the Foreign Policy Centre, who's been working with us on the campaign since the beginning, really. And Henri Tuyez, executive director of the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa. That, of course, with whistleblowers, you get investigative journalism, and as a response to that, you would tend to get SLAPP lawsuits as well. So I want to start by asking, because it's a relatively new concept, I guess, or a relatively new name for something that has been happening for a while. Whether everyone knows what a SLAPP is, or whether there's someone in the audience who doesn't know what a SLAPP is, I can give a very quick definition. It's quite simple, really, as a broad concept. So the definition that we use at CASE, the Coalition Against SLAPPs in Europe, is that a SLAPP is an abusive lawsuit filed by a private party with the purpose of silencing critical speech. Now, the difficulty then becomes, how do we identify what a SLAPP is? Of course, there has to be public participation that the private party wants to stop. There has to be speech that is in the public interest to some extent, and not a gross violation of privacy or extremely defamatory, say. And generally, one thing that we identify in SLAPP lawsuits is there is a big inequality between the respondent and the claimant in these lawsuits, in these claims. Where the claimant tends to be much wealthy, much more wealthy, much more influential, much more powerful in many ways than the person who has to respond to the claim. It's something that in the hundreds of cases which we have identified as CASE over the past couple of years, we see in almost every single case that we have identified as a SLAPP. A summary of these cases is available in the report that we published on the CASE website. It's the-case.eu. We publish an updated report every year with all the cases that we've logged in the preceding year and conclusions derived from our analysis. I really recommend a read if you're interested in it. It's a report which I think has been really essential in advocating for what became the EU Anti-SLAPP Directive. So for the first round of questions for the panel, what I want to get started with is each person's experience, how you've experienced SLAPPs in your own organization, with the people you work with, the stories you're working with, kind of action you've taken to respond to them. So we can start with Paul, I think.
Sure, Matthew, and thanks very much. And thank you for coming at this time of the day. Well, I'm the co-founder of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and because we investigate high-level crime and corruption, we're kind of a target of many of these SLAPP type lawsuits. We have over 70 at the moment at the level of the network. So OCCRP is a network of investigative reporting centers working worldwide. We work on 6 continents. Hence, we have court cases in about 4 continents. So many of these are court cases in very expensive SLAPP countries, like the UK or Switzerland and the US. A lot of them are local SLAPP court cases, so we have a variety of SLAPPs against us. They're all mounted by oligarchs or corrupt corporations, and they're all kind of strategized against investigative reporters by very well-prepared lawyers, lawyers whom we sometimes call enablers, who are working in the interest of the kleptocrats. Now, because we have very thorough editorial fact-checking processes at OCCRP, we're very confident in our reporting. So when we go to court, we know that we're very likely going to win in jurisdictions where the justice systems are correct. There's always risk, obviously. You don't know what a judge in the UK, what kind of meaning a judge in the UK will assign to your reporting. You might want it to say one thing in the reporting and the judge might see something else in it. So there's always that type of risk, but it's why we're kind of trying to be as thorough as possible with our investigative reporting and always think from the point of view of the person initiating the SLAPP, which is a huge problem for us as journalists, and this is one of the reasons why sometimes our reporting is very dry and it goes through so many hoops that is creating frustration inside the organization with the reporters, with the editors, with everybody. So SLAPPs are a huge problem for us. It's very much time consuming. It's something that we had to embed in our daily workflow, the fear of SLAPPs. For this, we have tried to devise some protection. Last year, we launched what we call Reporter Shield, which is a sort of an insurance against SLAPPs at the global level. It's something that's not just for OCCRP, it's really for the investigative reporting industry, and we're hoping to be able to also protect CSOs in general and other people, freelancers and so on. We're just starting with it, but we're really trying to fight this type of initiative against investigative reporting, because it's really what's keeping a lot of the investigative reporting and a lot of the information locked. And I'm not just going to touch on the discovery processes and how much information is actually blocked by these SLAPPs anyway around the world. So I think SLAPPs are a huge tool in the arsenal of the corrupt and the criminal, and it's really used against the public interest. And journalists happen to be a victim of that.
I'm thinking of one particular case that you had to invest so much in, which is the Fezhiev case, I believe the name was, the Azerbaijani guy. I mean, that really ate up a lot of time for the organization.
That did indeed. So I was sued personally by this Azerbaijani member of the parliament in Baku, who was also the liaison with the European Council. We did at OCCRP a big investigation called the Azerbaijani laundromat that, by the way, spoke about a huge money laundering operation that was coordinated from the Baltics here in this region. And as a result of that investigation, I got sued in London. At first, I was completely convinced that this court case would not fly. There's no way a judge in London would accept a case against a Romanian journalist that's mounted by an Azeri politician in a court in London. So I was like, kind of dismissive about it. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong. At the time I was living in Mexico and I was like not paying much attention, and I was hit hard when suddenly the court case started and the judge in London accepted it, and I was like, wow, this is not possible. And suddenly I was accused all over the place of lying, because obviously the lawyers of the Azeri were trying to attack in every possible way. Now, my organization joined the case, and luckily my co-founder, Drew Sullivan, at the time was was thinking quite hard about SLAPPs, and he put together some money for exactly this type of cases, and then we had help from a number of organizations that came on board, and we managed to be successful with this court case. We settled, we had to settle, but in very favorable terms for us. The investigative articles were still up. We just added a note that they were challenged by this guy. But the outcome, the aftermath of this was very interesting, because when you have a SLAPP against you, it's very important to be proactive. It's very important to continue investigating, and that's what we did. And as a result of that, unfortunately for Mr. Feyziev, the National Crime Agency in the UK went against his wealth in the UK, because they have these unexplained wealth orders, things that they can use to confiscate, to seize, to freeze various assets. And he's got about 30 to 50 million pounds worth of property frozen in the UK, and he's had some other trouble. Because in order to sue you in a jurisdiction like the UK, they needed to show standing in the UK. So he had to declare certain things, that. And then the authorities asked, so how did you get this? So the idea is that you always have to fight back with SLAPPs, not just to be on the defensive.
Excellent point, thank you. Eleanor, would you like to go ahead?
Thanks, Matthew. So, as Matthew said, I'm working on the enablers team at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. The Bureau is a small-ish, non-profit newsroom. We're about 40 people. We're about 13 years old. And the enablers team was set up to cover, actually, this is the only conference where I don't really need to introduce what the enablers team might do. But we cover the accountants, advisors, lawyers, but also the hackers for hire and the PR executives, the less well-known enablers of corruption, specifically through the City of London, which is where we're based in London, but also through the British Crown dependencies and the overseas territories. So being based in London and doing stories about London and the Crown dependencies and the overseas territories, London is also well known, as Paul was kind of saying, as the libel capital of the world. Libel lawyers in London command fees of more than £500 per hour. Court cases can run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds just to defend. And although you might win, you may not be able to claw much of your cost back. The enablers team, just from the nature of what we do, we're a bit smaller than OCCRP, but we recently faced a lawsuit, a legal case that was brought against us and considered a SLAPP by campaigners and activists in the space. That was on behalf of a company which is allegedly linked to the Kazakh dictator. So we're really talking about people with extremely deep pockets. What I wanted to mention as well, the issue of jurisdiction that Paul's touched on, you only have to have the most tenuous link to the UK in order to be taken to court in London. But also, it's not just the court cases. The thing which is not even seen or talked about very much is the legal threat, the letters that we receive, the legal letters. And I really want to talk about this as an issue that is not just about journalists. There are many stories that never come to see the light of day because of these threats. It doesn't take much. It only needs to be a whisper. It doesn't need to be a specific threat from a solicitor. It could just be that when you are in the right to reply process, somebody says, I'm copying my lawyer in and I reserve my rights. That is enough to put off our publishing partners sometimes that we rely on to publish our stories and amplify them. The Bureau received more than 70 legal letters last year, most of which were relating to the enablers team's work. That's an increase on more than 60 the previous year, so we're obviously irritating some highly litigious people. And we were sent one legal letter on behalf of a sovereign state. So if you want to talk about intimidation, that's what it looks like. and I think I just want to think about the cost of that. We know that anti-corruption work done by journalists saves money to the public purse. Actually, tax evasion costs a lot of money for the public, and when these stories never come to see the light of day, that's a tangible cost to everybody. Corruption is bad for business and so on. So last year, we forwarded 2 of what we considered the most egregious letters that we received to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which regulates solicitors in the UK who may send letters to people all around the world, actually. And one of them, they didn't consider a SLAPP, and one of the cases is still ongoing. So I'm gratified that they're considering these letters now, but there's still some work to be done, I think. We've also done a lot of outreach work recently to other journalists, talking about the stories that they've never been able to publish and they've had to substantially amend due to legal threats. We hear all sorts of stories. It's people being threatened to be sued personally, as you were, Paul. It's people being misled in letters that are marked not for publication. They make the person feel very isolated and frightened. And it's not just journalists, it's activists, whistleblowers of all kinds. Finally, I just wanted to say, we did a piece about Carter Ruck, which was published with The Economist in December. It was a long read. And in that story, we were able to talk about the victims worldwide of threatening letters. One of whom was a woman called Erica Broughton. She was an ironing lady by trade. Her husband was a truck driver. And she invested in the Harlequin property scheme, which later turned out to have nobody got their money back, etc. And one of the main people was prosecuted for fraud. But before that happened, Erica, when she realized that she was not going to get her money back, started a website just warning other people about the scheme. She received a letter from Carter Ruck threatening to take her to injunction. And she was so frightened by that she took the site down, as I'm sure is understandable. The scheme continued for 3 years. More people lost their money partly because they had not been warned. And this person was so frightened by what she went through at the time that she was too scared to give evidence in court when the case finally got there. So that was the heart of the story for me.
I mean, really, it's hard to think how this can be justified in any possible way. It's just really shocking what it leads to. It really is. Can we hear the perspective from public eye? I mean, I think I don't know. On an absolute scale, perhaps there are not so many cases from Switzerland, but the cases that we do see tend to be among the most egregious. So it's really a restrictive environment. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Hello, I'm Angela. I'm the co-director of Public Eye. Public Eye is a Swiss investigative NGO. We are about 40 people working at this NGO, and I'm the head of the research and investigative section. We are mainly focusing on commodity trading and also oligarchs in Switzerland, and therefore we are also quite active in publishing. And what happened last year, and now also start revealing the surprise, we have faced the biggest lawsuit ever in Switzerland. There is a commodity trading company called Colmar. They are suing us with $1.8 million in a civic lawsuit, and it was quite a surprise because we published this report about 4 years ago. There was a right of reply back and forth. We contacted them 6 times, really 6 times, no answer, and then they were starting suing us. And I think the triggering point was when we were doing this project with another NGO, with lawyers, and they submitted a complaint, and after the complaint was submitted, they start in a way threatening us with this kind of lawsuits. And on the other hand, it was quite interesting that the law enforcement institutions in Switzerland, they also started a big investigation based on our research, and then they started with the civil law with this $1.8 million thing. And what was really interesting in Switzerland, we are really at the beginning of a debate on SLAPPs. We are in a way very, very jealous of what is happening in Europe. And we even have politicians or MPs, they are not aware of SLAPPs. They are saying, look, it's a part of the rule of law and you have to go to court and to prove that you're right. We are there. On the other hand, we have also lawyers who are against adopting the EU directive because they also think it's a threat, and the whole environment is quite restrictive. We had an election, and then we have the right-wing government in place, and this really makes a lot of labeling law firms quite aggressive. We have an increase in that now in Switzerland. It has become a business model together with the enablers. I really like how you put that in your framework. And this is what we are now facing. And on the other hand, we can also say, and this is maybe the positive thing, we are also facing a kind of Streisand effect. Looking at our research, where we have published 4 years ago, it's quite huge now. And with this, we were also quite public with that SLAPPs we are facing, and we got a huge support from Amnesty International, and they also helped us building up a big worldwide campaign to raise awareness, and now we have a lot of clicks to that respective investigation, and we hope that this really helps us also in our battle. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Switzerland concentrates a really large number of commodity traders because of the tax situation in the country. I mean, it's a convenient jurisdiction, never mind the secrecy. And the restrictions that perhaps prevent others from looking into these commodity traders and their activities therefore has a global impact. It prevents the proper investigation of what the commodity traders are up to in the rest of the world. If I remember well, this particular investigation began because of a suspicion of the plunder of fuel from Libya. Am I right? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, you have a very good memory. It was an investigation on smuggling of Libyan gas oil during the war times, and we had very accurate data collecting them, and this investigation lasted about 1.5 years, so it was a very thorough process. Together with different lawyers, and when we came out, the impact was quite huge. So different investigations in different kind of places started. One investigation with the law enforcement institutions was in Italy. Then we had some effect in Switzerland, and yes, this company was quite under threat, and that's why they were slapping back in a way. Yeah.
And this is just one of many commodity traders that is up to no good. So this case would really, really set a precedent, I think. Susan. So, I mean, the UK is a really important jurisdiction in our campaign, even though, of course, it wasn't. It's not really directly impacted by the EU Anti-SLAPP directive. But for the reasons Paul mentioned, I think your work there with the coalition is so important, because it has an impact for journalists wherever they may be, even if they have absolutely no connection to the UK.
Thanks, Matthew. I think, can people hear me okay?
There's a thing which you have to slide up. Yeah.
Try again. Perfect. Yes, I think, I've been working on SLAPPs now for about 4 years, and when I started in researching SLAPPs, which actually was not my intention, particularly at the beginning, but the term was not well known at all in the UK, and if people had heard of it at all, it was, of course, because of your mother, Daphne Caruana Galizia, I think, and obviously her cases, of which there was, I think, upwards of 40, cases at the time of her death, which, of course, you and your family had to continue fighting. And so I think a great challenge when we started was even just getting people to sort of understand the term. And I think there was a lot of hesitancy, particularly amongst the legal community, who in some part felt that it was a sort of American acronym that didn't fit within the UK context. The term had been invented by American academics about, I think it was the early 90s. So I'd say a sort of an initial challenge that we had, and I think you had it as well, and I think you're having it now in Switzerland, is just getting people to kind of get on board. But once you start explaining what a SLAPP is, as you've obviously done, and as we've heard from your examples, then people start going, oh yeah, no, I am experiencing that, and that is happening to me. And I think for us, in some of the campaign and the coalition work, we used different terms at the beginning, and then found it that actually having a kind of unified peg that we could hang things on, and the term SLAPPs has been really useful. But in terms of my research, I started a project at the Foreign Policy Centre almost 4 years ago called Unsafe for Scrutiny, which looks at risks and threats to journalists who uncover financial crime and corruption. I had previously been working for a long time on Russia and Azerbaijan and free expression issues there. And obviously, seeing the violations that were happening to journalists because they were either directly uncovering corruption and being, the repercussions were not happening to the people, unfortunately, that were carrying out the corruption, but it was happening against the people who were exposing it, or because they were living in such, corrupt societies. There was, the elite there had the ability to, suppress freedoms domestically. And around that time, 2019, the UK declared that media freedom was a foreign policy objective, a foreign policy priority. It launched the Media Freedom Coalition, which is now, I think, about 50 states worldwide will work in partnership to promote media freedom. But we just felt that there was such a disconnect at how corruption was a driver for these violations. And I'm very sad to say, I think we all know it, but the UK is one of those jurisdictions that is actively helping enable the laundering of corrupt money. I mean, of course, we have the title of the London Laundromat. So that's just all background to say that's where we started the project from. And one of the first things we did was a global survey about all kinds of risks and threats facing journalists, and very much actually thanks to Paul's support, we had responses from 63 journalists in 41 countries working on this topic, and over 70% of them were facing some kind of risk and threat, but 70% of those were facing legal threats. And depressingly enough for us in the UK was the international leading source of those threats, almost as high as those coming from EU countries and the US combined. So that was a massive flag for us at FPC, and also colleagues that we went on to form the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition with just over 3 years ago. That what is going on in the UK? Why is this such a jurisdiction of choice? And of course, we've already heard some of the answers to that from Paul and from Eleanor. But at the time that we did the survey, I actually only knew about Paul's case. You just never heard about any of this in the media. The media were not talking about this amongst themselves. The first time I had a conversation with Paul about it, I said, were your lawyers advising you not to speak publicly? And you were like, no, we were just really busy fighting the case. And no media were reporting on it. And so it was such a hidden problem. And so amongst the other things I think that we've been doing, and I think we're going to talk more about solutions, is just trying to bring all of this, to the surface. And I think the fact that it's been happening in other jurisdictions, and it's a kind of rising tides type of effect, has been very helpful.
I mean, never mind the cases that do become publicly known are obviously the tip of the iceberg, because it's very hard for us to find a true figure, let's say, for the stories that never should go to publication, but never do because of the threats that are.
Well, it's a totally, circular thing, because if you don't publish, if the threat is successful, then not only is information not out there, but you don't even know about the legal threat that prevented it from being published. So it's just a complete vacuum. And so it is hard to quantify. We often get challenged of like, well, it's only a few cases. But it's only a few cases to some degree, because those people are rare enough to have the resources to fight them, to get to the point where it's open and it's public. And I think Ellen already spoke really well that it happens at this early stage, and if you don't have the financial wherewithal or other resources, because it also is very time consuming, then it will not be able to progress, and it will just and then people don't want to talk about it. I think that's the other challenge, is journalists by their nature, and of course it's not just journalists, but people don't want to talk about it when they've been successfully slapped.
I mean, it's been really hard for us to build up, I think, the trust with journalists that is required to. I think this is true of any country that we've worked in. It's really been difficult, but we're getting there. Henri, would you like to go ahead, please?
Sure, okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Henri Tulliez. I'm not a journalist, I'm a lawyer in Paris, but I'm also the executive director and co-founder of an organization called the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa, which is a platform that offers legal services and different kind of protection mechanisms to whistleblowers whose disclosure might have an impact on the general interest of African citizens. And basically we're a group of lawyers, investigators, journalists and activists acting as a shield between whistleblowers and authorities, or whistleblowers and people who might want to harm them. And I think one of the reasons why I was invited here is because at a particular time, a few years ago, our organization was the target of a fierce attack, a severe attack, and SLAPP suits were only a part of the attack. So if you don't mind, I'll explain how the attack was bigger than just the SLAPP suits.
I encourage, not only do I not mind.
Okay, so basically, our NGO is based in Paris, and we had been approached by a Congolese whistleblower who used to be working in a very tiny bank in the Democratic Republic of Congo called Afriland. And he explained to us that his bank had been used by a famous Israeli businessman, Dan Gertler, who had been sanctioned by the US a few years ago, how the bank was actually helping this businessman to bypass the US sanctions and create a money laundering network who would allow him to continue his businesses as usual. So we started to investigate with him. We created a consortium of journalists to work with us. We partnered with British NGO Global Witness, and we started to investigate on the case. And we actually understood that there was another whistleblower still at the bank who was sending information to the first whistleblower. The two whistleblowers are called Grady Coco and Navi Malela. And I think it's good to hear their names, because to remember that behind the stories there's always a human being. So Grady Coco was in Paris giving us this information, forwarded us information that was given to him by Navi Malela, who was still working at the bank in Kinshasa. And we did our whole investigation, and like 2 days before sending rights of replies and letters, to give the persons we were investigating opportunities to comment, we basically started to receive threats and indications that the Dan Gertler and his friend had identified our source who was still at the bank in Kinshasa. We got very scared because, as you may know, Dan Gertler is very close to the regime in Congo, and he's a very, very powerful man. So we took the decision to take Navi Malela and his family out of Congo immediately. And like 3 days later, they arrived in Europe and they sought asylum in Europe. We then sent our letters and our opportunities to comments to all these people. And here the real war started. You mentioned Carter Ruck. I think we received, we stopped counting actually, because at one point we received 3 letters a day by Carter Ruck. We as SPLAF, Global Witness in the UK, but also Bloomberg, Le Monde, and Haaretz in Israel, who was also working on the case. And the letters included, allegations that what we were saying was based on fake information, that we had bribed the whistleblowers to get the information. It said that the whistleblowers were themselves thieves, that they had fabricated documents. I mean, all kinds of things like that. At the same time, we also even had lawyers knocking at our door in Paris, blackmailing us, threatening to broadcast damaging recordings about us, about the journalists on social networks, and all of that. And we decided to stay strong, but it lasted several months because each time they were asking for more delays for them to respond. And while they were doing that, they were actually preparing a stronger attack against us. So on the 1st of July 2020, we published our report called Undermining Sanctions, which was way more prudent than what we had hoped at the beginning. But facing these attacks, we really had to weigh every word you were putting in your report. We published the report, and immediately we were the target of a criminal complaint in Paris, targeting us, targeting the 2 whistleblowers, although they were kept anonymous in our report. And dozens of Twitter accounts started to attack us on Twitter. We even had they even paid for YouTube ads against us. So there were like fake videos attacking us on YouTube, and one video was seen like 500,000 times everywhere in the world. There was just an ad, and then we wrote to YouTube about that, and they couldn't do anything about it, which is insane. And but we decided to continue working and investigating because actually we had more data to work on. So we created a larger consortium and continued to investigate and work. And in February, we published about 10 articles with our media partners. And again, on the eve of the publication, the lawyer of the Congolese bank, the French lawyer of the Congolese bank, holds a press conference in Kinshasa where he actually says that the 2 whistleblowers had been sentenced to death in Congo for having fabricated documents. And we were completely shocked because obviously we didn't know anything about the fact that the 2 whistleblowers had been sentenced to death. And what we learned is that they had been sentenced to death after the publication that we made 6 months before, and that they were sentenced to death in absentia in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's what they had to offer to the public opinion. Like, we were on the facts, very strong on our facts, based on leaked data from a very dirty bank. And they were saying that whatever was saying was not true, and the proof is that the 2 whistleblowers had been sentenced to death. Anyway, we published our investigation in February, and at that moment we learned that we were also targeted by 9 defamation suits in Paris, coming from Dan Gutler, the bank, and all the members of the money laundering network. And at the same time, we received a summons in our office, brought by a French bailiff who was acting on behalf of the Congolese bank, for us to appear before a tribunal in Kinshasa. And I think that with all the attacks that we received, that was probably the one we were the most scared of, because we were very scared to be maybe sentenced to death or having to pay $5 or $10 million ordered by a Kinshasa court decision, which could then be brought to Europe to be executed in Europe or in France. The good thing is that we had to hire the most powerful lawyer in Kinshasa to defend, and he won the case in Congo just based on the procedural matters. And then we had to fight back for against the 9 complaints in France. And here I just want to say one thing is that although now PLAF is not being the target of any suits anymore, and I can The reason is that on the eve of the first hearing in France, the 9 people withdrew their complaints against us because I think they were scared that we would win. But today, the Navi Malela and Grady Coco, although they are living in exile and have refugee status in Europe, they are still sentenced to death. And there's no way we can get that decision cancelled at the moment. So we are trying to find ideas and avenues so that one day we can let them go back to Congo without being murdered by the
I
government.
mean, it's really truly a shocking case, and I mean the names of the whistleblowers deserve to be really up there, right at the top, among the victims of the most abusive, retributive action. I think because it's hard to think of more egregious cases, really. Which is why I mean, on sometimes I find myself thinking, is this just the way things are in the world of journalism? Do we just have to sort of suck it up? Or can we ever hope to change the system permanently and kind of rid ourselves of this sort of torture? Because I'm sure it really does feel like torture for the whistleblowers in this case.
Well, it does because, not only are they sentenced to death in absentia, but these guys used to be bankers in their home country and they can't be bankers in Europe because they don't have the same diplomas and all of that. So they actually had to go back down the social ladder. And, they were jobless for many years. So we had to help them to find new jobs, to feel more secure about themselves, etc. So now things are a little bit better, but only now in 2024, like 3 years after they arrived in France. But one thing that I think it's a difficult pathway of investigative journalism, and I'm not a journalist myself. But it's also, SLAPP suits in a way helped us because I'm here today explaining this story, and I think that these people who are doing SLAPP suits, it's a huge issue for us, but in a way they are giving us some kind of publicity. So the question is, who can advise them to do such stupid things? Because it's very rare. I think in France it's very rare that a SLAPP suit will help the claimant to actually win a victory. And here I just want to say one thing is that one of the lessons one of the lessons of what happened to us is the solidarity between the journalists and the NGOs. Like Suzanne and Charlie Holt and other people helped us to have petition letters, press release of dozens and dozens of NGOs and journalists showing their support to us. And as Paul said, you have to continue to investigate, but you also have to be aggressive yourself. You're being sued for SLAPP suit, you have to sue back. And actually what we did is that we sued back the French lawyer of the bank, and we actually sued him for defamation because he actually, during his press conference in Kinshasa, said things without having any factual basis. So now, and we sued him and we won.
Was this Emmanuel Daoud?
No, he was not. He was not. But he's a good friend of Emmanuel Daoud. No, his name is Eric Moutet, and I'm happy to give his name.
Thank you. So, we've taken all kinds of action as a coalition of organizations. And do you think, this is a question for everyone, do you think that we've been able to tip the balance to ensure that the net result of SLAPP action is no longer a deterrent to those who want to speak out and participate in public discourse, whether as journalists or activists or advocates?
All right. I unfortunately don't think we're there yet, because if you look at the number of SLAPPs over the past 2 years, it just increased, in fact. So I think the work done by Susan, by a lot of organizations, by CASE, helps a lot, and it kind of created an environment where SLAPPs are understood, and there are judges who understand the issues, and more lawyers who understand the issues, and journalists are coming together more to build some protections. But the reality of this is that I don't quite agree with Henri that this is a stupid thing to do to initiate, to mount a slap against a journalist. This is actually very smart, because these people know that they will, besides consuming your time, your precious time that you won't be able to allocate to investigate, they know that especially in courts in the US and the UK, that they can lock a lot of information inside these court cases, so you're not able to actually speak about those things publicly. Because
Can you just explain how that works?
I will explain. So, obviously, as a result of a slap, you keep on investigating, sure. But what you'll do during that investigative process is you'll use that information in court. You're going to post it in court to defend yourself. And you'll say, look, there's more of this corruption. There's more of this organized crime. And look, these are the documents. And at some point, the other party will realize, that, well, this is a little bit too much against me, and they will propose a settlement. Now, you do have a choice at that point, right? Do I settle, or do I go for a few years more of a court case and losing time and not being completely sure that you'll prevail? So many journalists, including myself, have made this compromise. I didn't want to go to court for another, year or two, and so I accepted the settlement because it was very favorable to me. But that also meant that a lot of the information that I gathered during the court case, I can't even talk about, and that was information that was even more powerful than what we initially published. So in this respect, I think this, the slaps are a really smart move on the side of the kleptocrats. There's one more thing here that I believe it's quite important. You go through a process of discovery in the UK or the US, where the discovery means, and I'm sure that many of you know what this is, but I'll just explain in a few words, is that the other party, the party suing you, will ask for data from your devices, from your laptop, from your mobile phone, from your everything, data that includes certain terms, certain words. In my case, the other party asked for data containing the word Azerbaijan. Now, I've worked for close to 17 years on investigations related to Azerbaijan. So I have a lot of data and a lot of sources that gave me information about Azerbaijan. That's all locked inside my computer, is encrypted, is all of that. But you have the obligation as part of the discovery process to give up all this data to a third party, not to the party suing you, to a company that's in the middle of this discovery process, and they gather all this data from your devices where you have to give them the passwords, you have to give them access, and then you go through a process where you revise the data and you say, well, this is too dangerous to be disclosed because it will expose a whistleblower. But what do you do when you're in the middle? So in my case, I was in Mexico investigating a very dangerous organized crime group, and I was very fearful for that. In the meantime, I had to review thousands and thousands of documents that were found in my computer containing the word Azerbaijan. And I had this fear that I might miss something, that I might expose someone, that I might, so this is a very tedious process. It's not easy at all. And then on top of that, you have to work with the lawyers because the lawyers are not specialized in the type of things that you're writing about. And I was very lucky in the UK to have amazing lawyers who are willing to learn and who saw avenues by learning alongside the investigative reporters. They were able to go, fight against the people suing you in a much more comprehensive way than I was able to. So that was a step. But all of this takes a lot of work, and it includes a lot of fear, and a lot of fear for sources, and so it's really, something that takes a toll in a big way. And as Henri said, this is part of a much bigger fight. It's not just the slaps. It's the other action around this, that you have to mount yourself as well. As part of one of the court cases that we were involved with, we realized, that this was about a big money laundering operation, and we realized that there were Western companies involved in the money laundering operation as well, and we sent letters to them and we said, why did you make deals with this entity, during these years? And we sent them the data. What happened as a result of that was that they very seldom answer you back on those, but they put pressure on the person suing, on the entity suing. So, but I wished I could make that information public, and I can't. So this is, where things get really, really tricky, I believe.
So, I mean, for everyone else, same question. Have we succeeded in flipping the deterrent effect onto the claimants in these cases?
Yeah, thanks. So in the UK, probably Susan is the best place to talk about the specific gains that have been made. But briefly, from my perspective, TBIJ is part of the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition, and there have, like Susan was saying, there's been more kind of talk about slaps. It's much more in the public consciousness. And quite recently, there was a private member's bill kind of in the offing to like an anti-SLAPP law. We also had the first kind of piece of anti-SLAPP action written into law in the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act last year, which gives an early dismissal mechanism in the courts and some cost protection specifically for slaps relating to economic crime. So that's something, although there are weaknesses in it that kind of need to be addressed. Unfortunately, the anti-SLAPPs bill that was kind of looked likely to happen in the UK has been interrupted by the election. And I kind of wanted to say as well, there are elections in many countries in the coming year, and it's our job to make sure that this stays as a priority on the agenda, and hopefully it will, and we'll kind of get a shot at that. In terms of the threatening letters, the Solicitors Regulation Authority issued a warning notice in the UK, which was very clear to solicitors that they need to act with honesty and integrity, and they must follow the code of conduct, and that they need to balance their obligations to their client against their wider professional obligations, including the public interest. So that's kind of welcome. Like I said, it's not kind of a silver bullet. We've submitted letters that we have. We're waiting to see kind of more from this. What TBIJ does, or what we do on our team, we've been doing kind of a piece of outreach work, talking to, proactively contacting all kinds of journalists and other campaigners and so on, and asking them, are there any stories that you couldn't tell kind of because of legal threats? What have you been receiving? And kind of in the spirit of that, because I think solidarity is so important, and that we have to start being kind of more open about this and talking about it more. I'll read just a few anonymized quotes from the letters that we've received. This is just a random selection. So, quote, "This is a breach of your journalistic obligations. Your source has misremembered key matters. Does your client accept she provided false information? Your client has deliberately refused to answer the questions. Reliance on a public interest defense would fail. Quote, your sexed up headlines, quote, a cynical and self-serving attempt to mislead its readers. Quote, this isn't journalism, quote, you're genuinely going to print some of this diatribe. Can basic tenets of journalism and, in fact, professional decency be followed? Quote, publication will be immediately subject to civil and criminal proceeding. Quote, your approach shows a complete disregard for the truth. So you can kind of get a flavour of the strength of the letters that we receive, and what we're hoping is to be able to talk more with each other.
Can anyone, perhaps here in the room, who's receiving or has received these letters, reach out to you about them, and what should they expect?
Yeah, we would love that. What they can expect is that we'll treat. We've thought through the process by which they can talk to us without kind of fear, and we'll treat it with sensitivity and confidentiality. Yes, please do reach out.
I really would like to second that. Solidarity is key, and what we started here in Switzerland is also that a building up of a coalition, and it's the first time we talk about it, and this is really the beginning. And I'm quite keen that is really crucial that the media also joined that kind of coalition. It was at the beginning quite difficult to really have them on board because it's such a taboo and no one is talking about it, and we have to crush that taboo first, and that's why solidarity is key. And on the other hand is what I would like to add is the best thing is really to fight back, to be loud, to be public, to build up international coalitions, and also learning from each other. And I'm quite grateful for CASE because for us it was with these 1.8 millions, it was quite crucial to have people we can rely on, we can talk, they know, they are really there for you. And I really would love to see that kind of international solidarity in that specific cases.
Susan, I mean, I totally agree with fighting back, obviously, but we need a framework for it, and that framework has to result in some kind of impact. So I think the UK has the first solicitors regulation authority. It's the first, let's say, regulatory body for lawyers that has introduced some kind of recommendation related to SLAPPs in Europe. And has that had an impact, or what has that impact been so far, if so?
Well, I mean, the coalition started in January 2021, so just over 3 years ago. And we were supporting cases, obviously, but we were always looking at solutions, and we saw it as a sort of a three-part thing, which was legislation, regulation, and cultural change. And actually, that cultural change is not just within law firms, but also within the journalistic and other communities themselves in terms of upping their defences. Alan has already touched upon legislation. I'll come back to that, but in specific answer to your question about regulation. What happened was, I think there was interest already building in the UK over kind of the year after we set up the coalition, particularly because of a couple of high-profile cases. But I really can't sort of underestimate the impact that Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine had, and in terms of this issue in the UK really accelerating up the political agenda and public kind of awareness, not least because one of the people who had the most high-profile case the year before was Catherine Belton, a journalist and author who wrote a book called Putin's People, and then basically had a legal pile-on, as it was called, because she was sued by 4 Russian oligarchs and the Russian state gas and oil company, Rosneft. And so suddenly in February, March 2022, there was a lot of interest, and the Ministry of Justice opened a 2-month consultation. And it was the conclusion of that consultation when the UK government said, we are going to, SLAPPs are having a chilling effect on freedom of expression, and we are going to legislate. And at that point, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority also started recognising this issue. We, as FPC, had just published London Calling, which is a report we did that looked at 35 SLAPP cases, not all of which reached the court. It included cases that had concluded, at this early stage, but were in the public domain. And the SRA at that point opened 20 investigations into possible SLAPP cases, and it also said that it was going to produce this warning notice, which had been a key recommendation from our report. That was finally published in November 2020, by which point they had something like, I think, 30, 40 cases. At the latest count today, bearing in mind we're almost, sort of 2 years later, they just last month said that they'd opened 70 cases. They have closed several, I think around 30, either because they didn't think there was sufficient evidence or they didn't deem it a SLAPP. However, they have referred 2 cases to the solicitors' disciplinary trial. So that's where the kind of body that will then judge whether any regulatory action will be taken. And they are still investigating the remaining, 30 plus cases. So there's been a lot of movement in terms of action within the SRA, but I think there's been a lot of frustration that it has taken this long, which I totally get. A lot of that work's obviously happening kind of behind closed doors. And they've also conducted 2 thematic reviews of their internal guidance, which hasn't really helped necessarily highlight the problem. There's some issues maybe with the methodology there, but they've certainly been active, and I think it's going to now, time will tell in terms of the disciplinary and with the remaining cases what will happen. The kind of anecdotal evidence that I've heard, particularly from in-house media lawyers, is that the warning notice, which Eleanor said already, has kind of put an impetus on solicitors, how they behave, how they write these letters. I think there's now an awareness that these letters are not just going between the solicitors themselves and the recipient, the journalist, that actually there could be a third party reviewing them because they could be submitted to the SRA. And I think that has, at least in some cases, made people aware that they can't just write whatever sort of threatening, that they have to be mindful more of their approach. However, I also hear and have seen letters that have not changed at all. So, I think it's a kind of mixed picture, which is also the same for legislation, which I can talk about as well if you want.
And who can people go to if they're thinking of filing a complaint with the SRA, let's say, about a letter they've received?
So there is information on the Solicitors Regulatory Authority website. You can go there, you can find the warning notice itself. You can also find the complaint form. However, at the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition, you can also find us online. We can and we do help people who want to make complaints or give advice. And there are lawyers within our coalition as well who very kindly give their time to help people and give advice as well, pro bono or low bono, which is, we're very grateful for that support. We couldn't do it without them.
What other solutions do you think we should mention that are systemic ones?
I think, because we've not really talked about the legislation, the UK last year did become the first national legislature to introduce anti-SLAPP provisions. That was within the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. Unfortunately, they took a rather flawed approach, and it's not been implemented yet. I think partly that's because there was this other bill that was going through Parliament until our general election, and that would have been a standalone bill. And within that, we had some successes in shifting the frame, because the first draft of that bill was also highly problematic and potentially wouldn't have been effective at all. And so there was progress going in the right direction, but for me, it really pointed to the fact that we lack any kind of international standards. And now, the UK, hopefully, whichever government, because this has been a cross-party effort, cross-party support, there's been a lot of support for addressing SLAPPs in the UK, which is very positive. So whoever comes in and forms our next government, they're probably going to have a lot on their agenda, but we hope SLAPPs will still be there. The new bill needs to be a robust an effective bill, and there are now going to be, because of the EU directive and also the Council of Europe recommendation that was similarly adopted in April, a lot of national governments who are going to be looking at their own laws, and they have the potential to start all off going in their own different directions. There are some anti-SLAPP laws already in place in, I think it's 35 US states, also in 3 regions of Canada. I think they're a little bit more homogenous in some places than in others. But this is why I think, this issue is cross-border. The potential for people to choose their jurisdiction based on, if we fix the problem, it will never totally be fixed. But if we make it stronger in the UK, Switzerland might become a preferable choice. So we need to have a solution that looks at the problem globally, and that's why I'm personally very keen now that the conversation shifts to that kind of international standards and be directing, governments to look at those to create their new laws.
And speaking about political agenda, I mean, if there's anyone in the room who has influence with the UK Labour Party, we really need to ensure that anti-SLAPP legislation is part of their electoral agenda, right?
Positively, David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, did say 2 weeks ago, it's not in Labour Party's manifesto, nor the Conservatives, but he did commit to saying that SLAPP's it's a key part of addressing corruption and the London laundromat in the UK. So we'll see.
We need to hold him to it. So, Henri, I mean, we should start the process of implementation of the EU anti-SLAPP directive quite soon. In your particular cases, would that have been of any help? I mean, would it have had any use for you in protecting the whistleblowers that you've worked with from legal action? Abusive legal action?
No, unfortunately, no. The only situation where it would have been helpful is that it would have probably helped us to kill the 9 complaints that they filed against us in Paris. But let's say that in France, it's easy for someone to sue us for defamation and to do SLAPP suits. It's more difficult to win. And in France, we are protected from the discovery. We don't have things like that. And I fully join you, Paul, that no journalist should have to go through a situation like that. It's an exhaustion. You don't focus on the work you're supposed to do. You're losing time, and that's terrible. In France, we have this far right billionaire who constantly sue people who are writing articles against him, but it backfired on him because everybody knows who he is now, and like the journalists act in solidarity. I mean, the good journalists act in solidarity and are happy to tackle him every time they can. So that's what I meant when I said that sometimes it can be a stupid thing, is that actually it can backfire on you. And I think Dan Gertler is one of these as well. Like, he spent so many years going after journalists that there is somehow a solidarity amongst journalists and activists to go after him because he went too far against us, basically. But one thing, I mean, I think what you guys have done in the UK is amazing, forcing to go to the solicitors regulatory to make sure that it can conduct disciplinary measures against solicitors is great, and I wish we could do the same in France, because you always go to the same lawyers when you wanna do a SLAPP suit. But the other thing that I'm very scared of is, I mean, in a way I think, and that's for me a question mark, in a way I think that when you do a transnational investigation, it's better to create consortiums and work with many other journalists, because then it's more and more targets for people who want to go after you. But where I'm scared of is when you are going to collaborate with journalists who work in countries where the rule of law is very vulnerable. And for example, in Africa, we've seen things are going in the wrong direction, because you have states who had decriminalized defamation and who have now go back to criminalizing defamation, and you have all these new cyber laws whereby anyone can be put in jail completely abusively. I mean, I was the lawyer of one of the journalists in Benin who was jailed for nothing, for a tweet which was not even defamatory, and my question is, when you do consortiums with many journalists around the world, is it an issue to actually work with someone from, I don't know, Niger or Mali or maybe Russia, I don't know, where the journalists, have bigger risk, and when there you could have a similar procedure as discovery, which could then have a very bad ripple effect on all the people who are working in the consortium. This is where I'm the most scared of. I mean, what Paul had to go through is horrible, but it took place in a country with a rule of law, right? It was, yeah.
Just check.
I mean, it happened to us in France. We know we have somehow a kind of protection from the judicial power. But if we speak about DRC and other countries, things are much more difficult. So I hope that the EU directive will, be replicated in these countries where the situation of journalism is much more difficult.
I mean, there's also the recommendation from the Council of Europe, which will affect far more states than the EU Anti-SLAPP directive. But is there something we can do to create an international standard? I mean, who should we be working with to do that? And can it even exist without broader respect for the right to free expression?
I think that's a pretty big question. I mean, I think international standards are important. I used to work at Article 19, International Human Rights Organization, working on free expression. And I do think they have an impact, particularly for the countries where there is rule of law, which the UK, we have it. So I think it's important. I mean, later this month, Canada and the Netherlands are co-leading a resolution at the UN Human Rights Council on lawfare and SLAPPs, and I understand that there is going to be also an aspect, aside from legal reform, of addressing of redress for victims of SLAPPs, because I think, as it's come up quite a few times, obviously you're not made whole even if you win. You lose just on every count, basically, even if ultimately the threat goes away or you win the court case. But as has already been said, most of the time, most of the cases I've supported, they never get to court. They either settle or they dissipate in some other way. But public, going public. I mean, of course, you have to take the context of every case. But the number of times that going public has actually been a deterrent, and as I think you were saying, fighting back strongly from the beginning, because I think this was happening basically in the shadows for so long, and people were getting away with it, that they saw it was effective. And I think people working in isolation perhaps felt like, well, maybe it's just us who are getting this, maybe we've done something wrong. So I really commend people like Paul and others who've taken such a you've taken such a strong stance to fight the cases. Everyone on this panel, actually. So yeah.
If I may add a few words to this, I think So first of all, obviously there's the huge threat, in the countries with a weak or corrupt law system. There's no denial about that. But even in the countries perceived as having a strong, legal system, like Switzerland, when we worked on the Credit Suisse project, we created this consortium of investigative reporters working on the issue. We couldn't work with Swiss journalists, because for Swiss journalists to even touch that type of data would be a criminal offense in the first place, without even publishing. So just touching the type of data. So we couldn't work with them. But I think you're right. I mean, and your approach in the DRC case was the right one, to extract the people, from that country where they were in huge danger, to protect them by having them in France and elsewhere. But I think that's just the first step. And this is where we need to up our game a little bit. Because the fact that these kleptocrats are suing us all over the world is a brilliant strategy on their part, but we can employ the same strategy against them. In what sense? I mean, if Kabila in those times, was looting the DRC and, the kleptocrats there together with Dan Gertler and others, these people have interests in other parts of the world. So if you cannot do anything in the DRC because the system is so corrupt, you can do something and investigate these people in other jurisdictions. I'm reminding right now about our action in the case of Khadija Ismailova's, case. She was threatened, she was, abused, she was jailed in Azerbaijan. And what we did as the investigative reporting community, together with Forbidden Stories, with with ICIJ, with everybody, with Matthew and everybody, was to actually go against the Azerbaijani ruling elite's interests all over the place, in France, in the US, in the West, all over. So that's where we need to be a bit more proactive. That's where we need to mount our defenses in an offensive way, so that we investigate, we are clever about the court cases, and we defend the court cases where we need to defend the court cases, but create coherent strategies to actually go against the kleptocrats in a bigger way, and not just based on a leak or on a moment in time, but based on a kind of a longer term strategy. I think that's the way to kind of fight back against SLAPPs and maybe deter these people from suing you in the longer term. It's a partial solution, but it's still something that maybe we have to think about.
Paul, and I'm just going to exploit you a little bit before we go to questions from the audience. So, I mean, we've talked about cases that are of really global importance, but in the case coalition, we also log cases from really small media organizations of 1 or 2 people that are active at a municipal level, for example, as a media organization. I mean, I've worked with people from Colombia and Mexico that are also working at a municipal level or at a regional level, and they are successfully silenced because they lack the resources to fight back. How can Reporters Shield help organizations working in that way?
Well, so as I mentioned before, Reporter Shield is our answer to fighting back, and it's where we're offering this service to the investigative reporters of the world, to small organizations in some tiny places, you know, but of huge importance places, you know, places where you have, for instance, huge mining operations, you know, huge extractive industries, but, you know, places that maybe we haven't heard of. And, you know, there's always really brave journalists in those parts of the world. So the Reporter Shield, what it does is we get in touch with these journalists, and they get a sort of an insurance so that when they get a threatening letter from the lawyers of the parties that they're trying to expose, Reporter Shield lawyers take the burden on them to answer those letters, to actually be quite aggressive against the lawyers that are employed by these kleptocrats, by these criminals, and so that we take some of the work, you know, and some of the pressure off the journalists, you know, so that they can keep on working. And if still the case goes to court, although it's interesting, I mean, these threat letters are a first step that's usually successful, and people don't really want to take you to court, because these kleptocrats don't like to spend that much of their money and of their time too. So, but if it still goes to court, Reporter Shield covers the cost of the defense. And the other thing that's important here is before publishing, the articles can be lawyered, can be checked by the lawyers for risk. So when the journalists publish, they are sure that it's all fact-checked, it's lawyered, you know, they can be, you know, they can go to sleep, you know, at ease. If it still goes to court, you know, we will defend that, we'll pay for lawyers, and we will train the lawyers in working with this type of cases with the journalists locally. Each case has a local flavor, and in many of these countries where SLAPPs are not that well known, lawyers go to court and defend the public interest, and they defend the freedom of speech, which works to some extent, but in many cases you have to understand the investigation. So the lawyer needs to work to understand the investigation. So Reporter Shield tries to create this global movement between lawyers to be able to defend journalists in a much more efficient manner. So the local journalists can now benefit from Reporter Shield by applying to Reporter Shield, and there's a process. Now, there's always the issue of failed states. You know, we won't be able to defend any case in a country like Iran or a country like Russia, where we know that the justice systems are always compromised. And that's where we take the approach of PLAF, where we extract the journalists, you know, from those countries so that they can report freely from abroad.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take some questions from the audience. Go ahead, please. Is there any, the microphone's behind you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for all the work you do. It gives us courage and hope. My question is to you, Matthew, about Daphne cases. She was killed several years ago, but then there were cases in court against her. What happens with those? And another question, I would like really to know if there are any examples of financial satisfaction for the reporter after the case ends, because as Paul said, many cases last years. In our cases, we had cases that last 6 years, 7 years, and if you have one case, it's okay, but we have 5 to 10 cases a year. And then you don't manage to work for the public interest because you work for the court forever. And at the end, we win all the cases, but we lost time and money. So if there is any good example about when the offender maybe had to pay legal costs and anything else, I would be glad to hear and to have a revenge in my inside. Thank you.
Just to answer quickly about my mom's cases, we started with 46 cases that my family inherited, and we reduced them to one case. We only lost 3. And the damages that were awarded were so low, we just never appealed. I mean, 300, 400 euros, something like that. But of course, it was the cost of fighting back, which was the real payment. I think we must have spent about 60,000 euros. So just in legal expenses alone, sort of never mind the time that you have to put into working with the lawyers and so on.
Hello, I'm Dara. I'm a journalist and also a researcher. So I'm from Cambodia, and the country might be the panel have never heard of. So I have been working for 3 or 4 media outlets, and all of them are end up very badly, not really good result, and very great to hear very excellent achievement that you have pulled through, but for us, we do not really pull through. We failed our mission. So like, I give you one in Cambodia, Delhi, like where I used to work. They facing, it could be a slap shoot, but it is a tax fraud. Like the government say they do not pay the tax. So shut down. And another one is a Phnom Penh Post. They also facing the tax eviction. And then they selling to another who are very close to the government. And last one also shut down. And then I work with a few international media. They also like, we written the article, and the article sometimes they have to push themselves to extract the article with like, oh, if you don't pull, we will take a lawsuit like this. So go back in time. What is the best solution? Whether we should fight or just stand and watch it going down? That's it. Thank you so much.
There was a question there, and one at the front afterwards.
Hi, my name is Jim Wasserstrom, and I am an anti-corruption troubleshooter and the founder of the Integrity Fellowship and Sanctuary, which is opening doors in Canada, which will be a place for 2 years for individuals who are suffering egregious retaliation in countries where the rule of law is poor, non-existent, failed states, and we will be initially starting with a small cadre. So I'm delighted to inform you as journalists and others that this is something that is an option. And I spoke about it yesterday in my session on whistleblowing. That being said, I've also, as a whistleblower myself, I've been slapped. So the first one I'd like to mention was when I accused the UN of corruption, and various UN officials, I did this quite publicly, and the UN officials that I accused publicly came after me through my attorney, and saying that I had done defamation and so on and so forth, and they sent me these various letters. And I had a very good, powerful solo practitioner attorney, and I was terrified. And so I said, "So what do I do about this, Mary?" And she said, "Bring it on." And because since they are outside of any jurisdiction, let them come to a jurisdiction, and then we'll really get them. So we wrote back to them and said, "Bring it on," and it disappeared. The second one, which I'm facing at the moment, for work I'm doing in another country, is another defamation suit. And again, I think that we have good local attorneys who will be able to protect us from this particular attack. But as part of my daily work, when people contact me, is, when they're in trouble, I usually advocate that when you're facing a SLAPP, especially one that could bankrupt you, figure out a non-legal alternative. Because using the justice system may or may not work. So think about what other areas of vulnerability that you and your attorney may be able to identify and use that. Paul has referred to this, and that's been very, very, very successful. It's been consistently successful. So using, say, well, if you go after me on this, and so when I'm involved in this, I always advise people, keep your powder dry. Don't, when you publish something, which we've done on many occasions, keep something in reserve. Don't publish everything. So when they come after you and say, we're coming after you for this, say, okay, well, if you do that, then this will find its way into the public space. Use their own tactics, their own extortion against them. And that's with organized crime, with slaptocrats, kleptocrats, etc. Just turn it around on them.
Thank you for gifting us with that term. It's a really good one. There's a question over here.
Good morning. My name is Sanjay Modi. I'm the general counsel at the Sentry. We're a US-based investigative reporting and policy organization. And I just wanted to briefly mention, you've all covered the consequences of SLAPP suits really well. One item I think that wasn't specifically mentioned is the consequences in terms of media liability insurance. When any of us receive SLAPP suits, it impacts greatly our ability to renew our insurance policies, which happen to be, at least for us, one of the single most expensive budgetary items for our organization, almost existential. And so just wanted to mention that. My question is, there was some talk about international standards, and in the US, we actually have a national law that prevents successful libel plaintiffs in other jurisdictions from enforcing libel judgments in the US unless the judgments that they've obtained meet the freedom of expression standards that we have in the US. And so I guess the question for the panel is whether in the jurisdictions that you're working in, whether there's any consideration to adopting laws along these lines. It's not a perfect solution by any means, but it might help. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So we take some of the... Okay, just quickly, so, you're completely right on the media insurance. Unfortunately, most of the investigative reporters around the world don't benefit from any media insurance in the first place. That's why we created Reporter Shield, which in the cases of organizations that have media insurance can be a complement. But you're right. It's a huge threat. The more court cases you have, the more premium you pay for the media insurance, and the more you're prone to lose that media insurance. So that's a huge problem. It's also, I think, one thing that we need to address really, really seriously, and we heard from the gentleman from Cambodia, is that it's not just SLAPPs that, court cases that follow your investigative reporting. It's actually legal attacks against the organization based on, where they accuse you of tax evasion issues. And we've seen this in the Philippines. We've seen this in many, many countries, right? So there are other types of court cases mounted against media organizations that, that we have to protect against. And I think that's where we need to expand a little bit the definition of SLAPPs, because there's so many of these that don't really fall under this umbrella right now. On the jurisdiction thing, one good thing about perhaps the only good thing about the UK leaving the EU, the only good outcome of Brexit is that the UK is not part anymore of the Lugano Convention. So the UK judgments cannot be really enforced in the EU. Which means, if you don't go to the UK, then you're kind of safe, against problems in the UK if you have a conviction there. That's not ideal, right? I'm not aware, and I think Susan will be, and others might be more ready to answer that question if there are efforts to do something similar to the US. I think that's a huge step, and that was something that helped a lot, US investigative reporting. Just one other thing. I don't think I know of any example of an investigative reporting making money out of a SLAPP. I know that the oligarchs and the kleptocrats and the slaptocrats, thank you for this term, they may lose a lot of money. But I'm not aware of any investigative reporter making money out of this.
Anyone else?
Just to go back to a couple of the questions, I think every case is different and you know best your local situation. The thing that I find and that I say is that you need allies. Some people have successfully crowdfunded for their legal fees and so on. Insurance is an issue because there's always an excess on insurance, and if more than one person comes up against you, you're paying that excess many times. But the thing that we really, really need to build in as journalists is time. You need to allow sufficient time towards the end of the process and plan for the fact that you're going to have problems according to your local situations, and not be scared to reach out to people who might be able to help you to help.
I also highly advocate for crowdfundings. It's quite a good way to highlight what you're going through, and this really keeps also the circle of solidarity ongoing. We really had a quite successful experience with that. On the other hand, it's also quite crucial to really be in contact, to share the experience. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's the most powerful tool I think we have here, and to really building up from different experiences and really start strategize around that, but also more on a global scale. What was quite inspiring for me yesterday was the speech of the special rapporteur of the right of human rights defenders, and it was really the first time mentioning SLAPPs, and I think we are now really on a good way to really highlight that also on the more international scene, and it gives me really hope.
Thanks. I'll just try to respond quickly. Firstly, on the question of costs, I mean, I agree. Sometimes settlements work where you get your costs paid, but you never get your time back, and usually it doesn't cover everything. It is something that we as the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition have pushed in trying to advance legislation, that there should be compensation and financial deterrence. I mean, often people are very rich, the deterrent is not enough, but the compensation is important. On the question of cross border protections, that's a really live issue in the UK. We have a journalist called Claire Rucastle-Brown who exposed the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia. She's been convicted there of criminal defamation earlier this year. It's currently under appeal. But there is the possibility that Malaysia might try to enforce the judgment against her and the fine against her, and she's in the UK. So it's a very live question, a very interesting one. And then just to end, I mean, coming back to the point about, I actually think we need to move towards a global coalition of organizations. There are people, obviously, who are facing this issue all over the world. There are other, someone was here earlier from Protect the Protest in the US, other coalitions. I think us as coalitions need to also, take the lead from the journalists too, and start networking ourselves and making this, an international issue.
No, just to jump on what you've just said, and talking about solidarity, I think we should not stay within our own professions, and that all the people showing goodwill, who are trying to tackle corruption and kleptocrats, should work together in these issues. Like, we should not leave the journalists on one side, the activists on the other side, the lawyers on another. We need to be all together in here, in it, and this is what we've been talking a lot about. I think everybody said the word solidarity, and I think what you guys have done with Case helped us to do that, and I'm very happy to hear that Reporters Shield is not only for journalists. And so I think that if we do such an international and global coalition, we need to make sure that everyone is involved, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Do we have time for one more question? Yes. No, that's it. Sorry, but I can answer in person if you like, maybe. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here.